Hi, we're on Radiance block of the month, month 3. I pulled all my fabric out and ironed it, and I labeled them. I have to say it was really difficult to distinguish between fabrics A, C, and F. So I had to refer to the block picture to make sure I got them labeled correctly. But fabric A is the one with the little sunflowers on it. C was this one we used last month for the center block. It's a little bit darker. And F has the paisley on it, which, interesting fabric. At the front looks like the back until you flip it over. Anyway, so we'll get on to cutting. Step 1 for fabric A, it says to cut one 5-inch strip and subcut that into 4 5-inch squares. And then you're also going to cut a 2.5-inch strip, subcut into 8 2.5-inch squares. So I cut the 5-inch square and then I cut it into 4. This is scrap. And then this is the 2.5-inch cut into the 8. Is it 8? 2.5. So you should have 8 2.5-inch squares, and then this will be scrap. Right, for fabric F and K, it says to cut a 7.5-inch strip and then cut one 7.5-inch square off of the strip. So rather than cut this strip across the whole fabric and just having this waist, I'm gonna just cut a 7.5-inch square out of the corner of both fabrics. I went ahead and squared this end up because it was a little bit off, and I'll just cut those pieces out, and that'll be it for that. So fabric G, you're gonna cut 3 2.5-inch strips. One strip stays whole, and the other 2 strips are subcut into 10.5-inch strips. So this was my excess, and this is my whole piece. This is my 10.5-inch strip. I cut these together. There's 2 here. And then here's my other numbers 3 and 4. If you have to square this piece of fabric up before you start cutting, be really conservative with what you cut off of the end when you square it up, because this is all I had left. So you don't want it to go into the selvage. So fabric I, it says to cut 2 5-inch strips and subcut those 2 strips into 8 5-inch squares. Also cut 2 3-inch strips, cut into 8 3-inch squares. So I cut my 2 5-inch strips and cut them into the 8 squares. This was scrap. And for the 3-inch strips, it said to cut 8 of them. So rather than cut 4 out of each strip and have 2 short pieces, you can get 7 out of one strip and then 1 out of this. So that leaves a nice long strip for scrap. You can use it later in the quilt if you mess up, or I like to do mini quilts and scrappy quilts. So the bigger pieces I can save. That's what I try to do. Fabrics J, L, and M. I went ahead and cut all 3 of them together. You gotta cut a 2.5-inch strip and then cut that 2.5-inch strip at 10.5-inch. So this was my excess up here. And then I just I used my shape cut ruler, which I love. Squared off the end here and then cut it at 10.5 inches there. All right, so they're all 3 cut the same. Fabric O, it says to cut 2 3-inch strips and subcut that into 8 3-inch squares. So I went ahead and I cut these 2 3-inch, and then I cut 7 out of the first strip barely got 7. It actually did go into the selvage a little bit, but that should go into the 1/4 inch seam, so I'm not too worried about that. And then this is the 8th one. So this whole strip will be left over. The next step was to cut one 2.5 inch by 10.5 inch strip. And you're also going to cut another 2.5 inch strip and leave it whole. So the 2.5 by 10 is here. I probably need a new blade. This is extra, and then this is the full strip. So, and all this, this big piece up here is also extra. So we've got one more piece to go and we can get to the sewing machine. The fabric P, that was the blue denim looking fabric. It says to cut one 7.5 inch strip and subcut that into 2 7.5 inch squares. So I squared it up. That didn't leave very much fabric. Anyway, so here's my 7.5 inch squares, and then this is scrap, and this is scrap. It's probably too small for even my mini quilts. And that's it. All our fabric is laid out on my little project board here, and we're ready to go to the sewing machine. There's quite a bit of extra fabric from this block. I'm saving all of them, and it's a lofty goal, but I'm hoping I can shrink this pattern down when we're done with it and make a miniature version of it. But we'll see if I have enough fabric and if my math is good enough to shrink it down.